I'm joined today by a mentor and friend of mine, a wonderful lady, mother of 5 children. Her name is Shanna Miller. She's a published author and really reached out to me after I lost my husband several years ago. She was one of those who really stuck by me for the long haul. Those are treasured friends. So, Shanna, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences.
Thank you for asking me, Julie. This is a great opportunity, and I appreciate that you have done this podcast and are reaching out to serve others as well.
Thank you. So, Shanna, could you just do a life sketch?
Sure. I was born and raised in Arizona, lived in Phoenix until we moved to the inland northwest after my husband graduated from college. We have been married 50 years now. Woohoo.
Wow.
And we, as you mentioned, we have 5 children, 3 of whom are living, 2 that have passed away. We had some difficulties getting pregnant when we first decided that we did want children. And I did have some miscarriages. And a birth order, if you kind of want to put the ducks in a row, goes Lindsay, and she passed after 2 weeks of life. And then I had what I call my bad miscarriage. And then we had Corinne, and then another miscarriage, and Lynette, who passed away at age 29, 13 years ago, and then Brett, and then Melinda was our little caboose that I was ready for her for a while, but she didn't decide to come for a while.
Okay.
So that's our 5.
Wow. Plus several miscarriages.
Yes, definitely. And that's rough because, you want those children. And then when you, and for us, because we had some difficulty having a viable pregnancy, it was each one you're grieving as well, each one. But it was rough. It was rough. And let's see what else about me.
What hobbies do you have?
Oh, so many hobbies, Julie, so many hobbies. I enjoy doing things with my hands. I love to sew. Yes, I do quilt. I love water fitness. I love reading. I enjoy writing. I keep finding more interests. The older I get, the more interests I seem to get to.
Well, and you're one of those really amazing ladies that as you get older, you never seem to lose your wonder about the world around you, and you are a grandmother extraordinaire.
I know we have 9 beautiful grandchildren, and I call them the divinely fine 9. And so yes, our oldest child, Corinne, has 3. And then our son, Brett, has 4. And then our youngest daughter is Melinda, and she has 2 boys. And so we are fortunate to have Corinne and her family. They live only 10 minutes away. Melinda and her husband and family are in Oregon. And then our son, Brett, and his wife and 4 children are near Dallas, Texas. So we have them spread out a little. But right. Yes, I love being a Nana. I am Nana. And then for some of my friends that, I believe that there's a family that you have, and I believe that there's the family that you gather. And so for some of my other friends, I am their children's Nana Shanna. And so, yes, I love, I love being around the grands. I love getting on the floor and playing with them. And as much as I try to be a wonderful mother, I know I had many failings. My kids will tell you them if you ask. But this grandmother gig, I really like it a lot.
It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Everybody should have a Nana Shanna in their life, I think.
Thank you. Let's see. What else do you want to know? Let's see. Sometimes I call it, though I'm not a believer in reincarnation, I sometimes call it, this was my life doing this. This was my life doing that, So in a previous life, I was a, a secretary before they called them administrative assistants. And then what else did I do? I was also, after my husband retired, I got into the banking field. He had been a banker and always volunteered in schools, active, PTAs, boards. One of my newest groups that I've been affiliated with is Lion's Heart. I don't know, the Center for Courageous Grieving.
Yes, I have heard of Lion's Heart.
I volunteer for them. And we have an event coming up November 9th that I'm going to be helping with.
Can you talk about Lion's Heart and what that is?
It's a relatively new 501c3, and they have some of the folks that are on the board are people who have had children die or have had pregnancy loss or both. And then some of the members on the board, including the current board president, they're in the professionally involved, either with counseling or in pediatrics, like maybe they work at Sacred Heart in the NICU. So a wide cross section of people that are coming together to support families, but especially children as well. And so they have the clinical side that I think has been up and running. But again, I've been more involved on the volunteer side, trying to get the word out. And the event on the 9th is like a day camp kind of situation for families. And so we're excited for that. And more is coming out about it. But again, Chris Frazier is on the board and runs the events. And she's someone I know has also been involved with your podcast.
Yeah. Chris and Seth Frazier, they were one of my first interviews. So people sometimes forget when there's been a major loss that there are children involved, that there can be in a family situation.
Definitely.
Little children have grief and
that is such a valid point, Julie. I know with our first loss, it was just Michael and myself when our baby Lindsay passed. But when Lynette died as an adult, we were grieving for our loss. We were grieving for our children who were grieving the loss of a sibling. And so when I heard about Lion's Heart, I appreciated their mission of reaching out to families, but especially to children.
Yes. Thank you. It's a great organization. So let's talk about your loss with Lindsay. Had you had miscarriages up?
Yes, I'd had a miscarriage before Lindsay. It was okay. So, I mean, maybe TMI, but I always tell our children, you can choose what you choose, when you're planning your family, but I advocate having maybe a time where you're not pregnant, so you have a time to get to know each other as a couple. Mm-hmm. And so we had that time. We had stopped those kind of precautions. Mm-hmm. And then we thought, boom, we'll just get pregnant. Didn't happen. And so I saw an obstetrician, gynecologist, and they put me on some medication to try to get things going. Didn't really work. Mm-hmm. And then we moved away. And I don't know whether it was just my body was finally ready or what, but I became pregnant the first time. Early on, I had a miscarriage, and then I had a full-term pregnancy with Lindsay. Everything was going well with. I mean, there were no problems with the pregnancy other than I was anxious because of my previous experience.
Of course, yes.
But had delivered her, had a quick delivery. I mean, I walked around partially dilated for a few weeks. And so by the time I was feeling maybe we should go, by the time we got to the hospital, I only had an hour and she was born.
Wow.
So that was good. That was good anyway. And
so every indication was all these hard things were behind you, and you were on this dawn of this new beautiful experience.
Of this new day. We had this beautiful 8 pound, 11 and a half ounce beautiful girl.
Wow.
And then Michael had been sick, and so I actually stayed with a cousin for a few days.
Uh-huh.
And then I went home, and then Lindsay got sick and, talked to the doctor. Things seemed kind of okay. And then she aspirated, and I gave her, baby mouth to mouth and nose.
Yeah.
And we got her to the hospital, and they were able to get her going again. And then a few days later, she arrested, and they couldn't get her going, and so she passed. And my theory now is, because they didn't talk about it then, but I think she might have had RSV.
Yeah,
very
dangerous.
But almost 48 years ago, we didn't even talk about that.
Right.
And so then she died, and to the devastation. And we lived in Washington. You have to remember, again, this was, 46 years ago, I'm sorry, but it was a long time ago. And we did not have the kind of communication. We had phones, so we could let people know. So my mother had flown up, but by the time she got here, Lindsay had already passed. My husband's mother and grandmother came up for the services, but our faith community literally lifted us and helped us. But yeah, we were devastated. We'd done everything right.
Right.
And it was a really, really hard time. Trying to put it into words. I did put it into words eventually, into some of my early poetry, and have since done some as well. But I would say that beyond our faith, because I do believe that I will be able to be with Lindsay and with Lynette again sometime, is my husband. We were great, but this loss, it cemented us. I mean, we turned to each other instead of away from each other. And I have witnessed within my, not so necessarily friend group, but people that I know, that it can, the loss of a child can totally, it's so devastating that it can pull a couple apart as well.
Right.
And no judgment for anyone else, but we were able to literally cleave to each other and hold each other and lift each other up. And our faith community, I eventually got another job because I had quit right before Lindsay was born. So, threw ourselves into things. But then I had what I call my bad miscarriage. And that's where I lost the baby in the doctor's office, and then had to have a D&C. And then we had Corinne, and I had some bleeding with her. And so I thought, oh no, I'm going to lose this one too. Here we go again. And I tease that, it's amazing that Corinne is as normal as she is, because I was poking and prodding her when she was a baby. It was another early delivery, not early, but quick. Not a super long labor. And they said, go early. because, if your first, your second one's going to be faster than your first one. Well, I went, what for me was like 3 hours, and it seemed like, what am I waiting around for? But anyway, it was a great delivery. And again, yes, I was always checking to see if she would, to make sure she was moving and awake, and that, because I was afraid she was going to die.
Yes, that's totally understandable.
And then we had another miscarriage, and then I had Lynette, and she was born no problems. And then a few years later, we had our son Brett, and we were just surprised because we thought, well, gee, after 3 girls, we thought Brett was going to be a girl too. He was very much a boy, but ultrasounds at the time were, it was like, sure, that's a baby.
Right.
That's they did not have the kind of ultrasounds
resolution
now where they're like 3D, 4D, whatever you want to say, where you could see the baby's waving, saying hi, mom and dad. And so we had our wonderful Brett, and then 5 years later we had our Melinda, and then I retired my uterus. So that is our family. And
you went through a lot
for our for Corinne and Brett and Lynette and Melinda. They never knew Lindsay, and so if we happened to be in the town where we lived when we had Lindsay and where she's buried, they might go with us to the cemetery, and they might see one of the few pictures we have of her since she died so young. But their experience was so different than
right.
when we lost or when Lynette passed. Yeah.
Can you speak to that experience?
Every child makes choices, and some of their choices maybe you wish they didn't make, but they were your choices, their choices to make. And a little bit of family history, there's alcoholism in our family, and on both sides. And so there was one point where I spoke with her, as well as the other children too. Part of our faith as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that we don't do alcohol and or other drugs, and we're supposed to be taking good care of our bodies. And so I had the talk with the children, and specifically with Lynette as well, that it's not just about our faith, but our family can't do alcohol.
Right.
We become addicted to it. Right. And there's been some heartache in previous generations because of that. Right. And so I had that talk with her, but knew that she had stepped to the side of being fully engaged in what we call the gospel path. And I knew she drank. And I knew she curbed it whenever she was visiting family. So in 2011, she had some health issues. And so had been on she had colitis and had some serious health issues. So she couldn't drink, and with some of the medication she was on. And then there was also, with her being 4 hours away, I won't say typically, but often, someone who is an alcoholic, and also someone who is very intelligent, like Lynette is, she was good at hiding it. She was good. Right. And because I maybe wasn't seeing her every day, because we would see her, when she would come over to visit, or we would go over there, it was also probably fairly easy for her to, we'll say, camouflage her, right. Her drinking. And so like I said, I knew she drank, did not suspect that she did to the extent that she did. So one morning, she had said she was going to, when I spoke to her like the week before, she had said, well, I'm going to go in and get some more medication for the colitis because it's still bothering me. And then the following week, I heard from her. Well, to back up, she and her fiance, we were planning their wedding. And so, we were, of course, talking about that and excited for that. And I had a thought, well, you should call Annette. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to be talking to her in the next couple of days anyway. It's okay. We're all busy. And the next day, my husband and I were we used to have a lake place. We were up at our lake place getting the boat put away. And so I had left my phone in the vehicle and had a message from her fiance and to call him. And so I did. And his first words to me were, Shanna, sit down. I'm like, okay. And so I sat down, and I was a little ways away from my husband. And he said, without any preamble, Lynette's dead.
Oh my gosh.
And Julie, this primal, I now know what a primal scream is. It came out of me, and Michael, of course, rushed over to see what was going on. I told him, and also almost simultaneously, I did not know, Chris had been trying to reach us for a while and hadn't been able to reach us. And so he had spoken to Corinne and Melinda. And so Corinne and Melinda were trying to get to us because they knew we were about an hour away. And so in this case, it was our children were trying to help us. And Brett was aware too, but he was living in Utah at the time. So after pretty much literally picking ourselves up off the ground, we made a trek to from our home in Liberty Lake to Kirkland, where Lynette lived, and some friends, actually some family connections from Brett's wife's side we had a lot of what I call tender mercy. Some of this just happened to have kind of things like they just happen to have this, they just happen to have that. They happened to have a place that was close to there that they just let us use. They were transitioning from one home to another home. They were moving, and it's like, we have this place. They let Laura know, and we were able to have a place to be. And our son-in-law, Landon, Melinda's husband, was overseas. He flew back. Brett flew up. We were able to have everybody in the home together. And that was a bonus. Also, as we were driving over, we reached out to one of the leaders of our former leaders of our congregation that I had worked with as a member of the Women's Auxiliary, the Relief Society. And he just happened to be going over to Seattle to celebrate his wife's birthday. That was the Sorensens, Brent and Chris Sorensen.
Oh, yeah.
And then one of the members that I'd worked with as the leader of the Women's Auxiliary when we lived in Issaquah, which is not too far from Kirkland, he reached out. And so we were able to connect with them, and they prayed with us and prayed over us. And, we felt lifted and guided and strengthened to be able to do what is the hardest thing we ever done, but doing it for the second time.
Right.
So, and, you can't compare loss. And so while I have not had my spouse pass, I do understand some loss. I understand
Yes.
loss a bit. But to have our baby die was, while it was so devastating, to have someone die that you had been involved with, say, almost 30 years, because I loved them in utero as much as I loved them when they were delivered.
Mm-hmm.
That just added another level of devastation, you know? So yeah, that was rough. Lynette's friends were amazing.
Mm.
They came. One of us loaned a car so that we could run errands, because some of us had vehicles, some of us didn't, because people were flying in to help. They organized a wake for her. They supported. You know, they literally put their arms around us too.
Mm.
And then there were the people, because we have lived in different places. There were friends that showed to support us at her memorial service, and who helped us. Just, you know, you know that people care about you, but you know, when you have people literally drop what they're doing, and you understand that when you've had them, they drop what they're doing to try to ease your load, knowing that maybe they can't take it away, but they can help lift you up.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I can see how difficult that has been to express. So thank you so much for sharing. And I'm glad that you mentioned the dropping everything to be there for someone, you know, in those critical first hours and days. It makes a huge difference to be surrounded by people who just love and support.
Well, and I appreciate that you said that, because our experience, you know, and maybe part of it is technology as well as communication, but the information, the supportive information like books and that, there is so much more now than there was in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I appreciated as well, when my father passed in 1985, and people were saying, you know, Shanna, what can we do to help? And I said, well, I'm going to have to go back to my family, because my parents were living in Arizona when my dad died, and where my mom's going to continue to need help is after we're gone.
Exactly.
Because as much as that initial outpouring, you need it, and it's wonderful, your loss is still a loss.
Yes.
You know, a month later, a year later, 40 years later. And so I literally said that to my mom's friends. It's like, we appreciate you so much. You know, can you be the boots on the ground here?
Yes.
Because sometimes people who are grieving may not be as open about themselves, about reaching out. Like, I need this, you know, and
Yes.
I don't want to say it's become more acceptable, but it almost has become more acceptable to say, you know, I'm not going to stop grieving at a year.
Right.
I'm not going to, you know, it used to be, okay, you've gone through all the, what they call the however many steps of grief. There's a whole lot more than, sorry, losing my grammar here, but there's many more things going on than just 5 steps of grief. There's the cycles of grief. There's, you know.
We do recycle grief.
Yes.
We really do. It's like a spiral. I find myself doing that.
I appreciated some of the information that we obtained after Lynette's passing from Hospice of Northern Idaho, or North Idaho, however they say it. And one of their newsletters talked about the seasons of grief.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that, you know, this another way of looking at it versus, you know, the winter of your grief is like, that is like, whoa, that is the deepest, darkest, hardest part, even though that's just the devastation. And then through the seasons, eventually if I'm remembering right, I need to look at it again. When you come to summer, it's not that the grief has gone away, but you have, I'll say, made peace with it.
Right. It walks with you.
Yes, and you walk with it, but which is not to say you're not going to have, I had not heard of this term until after Lynette's passing, grief bursts, where there'll be a what we call a trigger, and you're like, why am I crying about this now? Or why am I feeling so low right now? And it's because there's been some kind of trigger. And so you're reliving maybe part of that initial grief period.
Right. Absolutely. And you call those grief bursts.
Grief bursts, yes. And if you look at that material that I gave you after Steve passed, there's a little sheet on it.
Well, that was something I was going to bring up that I thought was really lovely on your part. And it was a really good idea because you don't always know when someone is grieving how much they want or need people to come into their grief, right? And one thing that you did was once a month, you sent in the mail, and we see each other all the time. We go to church together, but in the mail would arrive a copy of whatever you had gotten from Hospice of North Idaho, their newsletter, right? And so it was there for me. I could look at it. I could glean something from it.
Or not. If you want.
Yeah, or not. Well, and I appreciated that. Little reminder that someone was thinking about me.
Well, when we got in a little later with going to a counselor for some grieving therapy, bereavement therapy, I guess they call it. Mm-hmm. And someone that I knew, I didn't necessarily want to go to someone that I knew and saw all the time. Mm-hmm. And so they recommended this one therapist that was at Hospice of North Idaho. And I had no idea at the time. I thought hospice was only end of life and only if you had cancer or something, that I had no idea that hospice had so many different facets. And so reached out to them, saw the therapist, and she said, well, you guys are coming in a little late to this, because we were, like I said, like 9 months since Lynette had passed. So she gave us the whole stack of these bulletins, and I looked her right in the eye and I said, I want you to know, I will be sharing these with people, just so you know. I'm going to be doing that, Mm-hmm. Disclaimer, whatever, forgiveness, whatever, but I will be sharing this. And so I got initial copies for our children, and then, it's kind of a grieving ministry. I will send them to people, and I've sent them to our neighbors. And you're right. I liked it because you can look at it or not look at it. And one of the things that I learned, though, from our therapy is that nowadays, anything that doesn't harm yourself or anyone else is pretty much, if that helps you, it's okay. If you're not harming yourself, that means taking things into your body that aren't good for you or hurting yourself or others, that might be a valid way to help you on your grieving journey. And so this has helped me on my grieving journey because, as you said, you don't know. One of the biggest things I think people do need to do, if they have that feeling, oh, I need to reach out to so-and-so, just do it. Mm-hmm. And don't worry about saying the right thing or the wrong thing. Just I'm thinking about you. Because yes, for a lot of us, and I love it if someone knows me and knows our children's names, Lindsay and Lynette, if they say, I know you're still hurting and missing Lindsay and Lynette. Or sometimes you just want to hear their name.
Yes. They lived, they mattered. They took this beautiful space.
Yes,
in
that's right.
In the world, in your heart.
Yeah.
So how has that changed your family dynamic without having Lynette?
Oh, well, holidays, when we quote all get together, which, um, with families, like I know Brett and his family are going to be able to come up this summer. And so that will be wonderful. But yet there's an empty space. And with Lynette, we feel the space more because the space was filled for at least 29 years. And some things were very hard. The first year after she passed, we went to Nesco in Oregon, which is one of our favorite family places. And we did a family portrait, the first one without her. Mm. And we all wore some yellow because that's her favorite color. And there was a sunflower because that's her favorite flower. And one of the pictures, there's just a little sunflower that was tucked into the ground, not an artificial one, a real one. But that space, there's always an empty space. It's always there. For Lindsay, again, for for my husband and I, more than for the children, not that they don't acknowledge Lindsay's life or anything, but she was not an active part of their life. They heard for us,
right?
But it was not an active part of their life. So our family dynamic, we were a pretty close family anyway. But again, for our children to be in the caretaker's role of trying to watch out, especially those early days, watching out, being the mama bears and the papa bear,
right.
To their parents, to try to give us some relief and while, going through their own grief. It's tough. One of the things I've always been a proponent of, and I probably preached it more after Lynette's passing than Lindsay's, and I don't mean preach, I actually probably did preach from the pulpit on it, but is that, Lynette knew we loved her and we knew she loved us. And so my feeling is, if you have fences that need to be mended, please mend them. There was one lady I was speaking with when we lived that brief time in Diamond Lake, and I had shared over the pulpit when I was bearing testimony of, just what I said. And she said, I'm going to reach out to, and she named a family member. I haven't spoken to her for a long time, and I need to. And so that's one of the things is that, the people you love and even the people you like, they need to know that you do, because you don't know how long you are going to be able to be intimately associated with them in, I'll say, this sphere. So that is one of the things that's probably made the biggest difference is that valuing the relationships that you have. And if there needs to be some work, doing your part. This doesn't mean that the other person will support you in that, but you don't want to be the one when you could have reached out. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. It's such a vital point you're making here, because what I see you connecting is this love that you had with your children, and even with Lynette making the choices that she was and distancing herself in some ways from your family, that they all of, because you guys were so deliberate and intentional about making sure the relationships were intact as much as they could be, that they knew they were loved, that how naturally it made it for your children to come and support you, and for you as a family to really, really bear this burden together. Sounds like it's directly related to the strength of the relationship you had before she passed away. Am I getting that right?
I think that I think that's definitely part of it. But I think also they are such strong individuals in and of themselves that while our family is important to them, their families are important to them as their individual families are important, and I think they also came with that too. That just part of who they are as well. I like to think we nurtured that, but as you know, every child is different. They'll let you know too.
Right. But I love that you are able to look back and know that Lynette knew that she was loved.
Oh,
and
definitely.
That you knew that she loved you.
And so while I had the regret and that I mentioned, I don't know if I had made that phone call that I could have changed the outcome.
Right.
But I would have had one more time to tell her I love her.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that's my regret.
Right.
Is that I could have said, "Oh, I love you," talk to you soon. When in essence I wouldn't be. But and so also is again part of that is that if you feel prompted to do something, if it's something good, if you get this little bit of a thought, we that are faith based, and especially in our faith, we believe that's the Holy Ghost saying, "Hey, maybe you should do something there."
Right.
Listen to that, because even if it's not a grand or glorious, "Oh, my child died the next day, I'm so glad I did it." Maybe just someone needed you to help lift them that day.
Right.
Or you will be lifted. I can't tell you how many times I don't serve to feel better, but when I serve, I feel better.
Right. Absolutely. I really appreciate that. So your faith is very strong, and I've heard you share many times your faith in Christ, in the resurrection, in the life after this, eternal families, all of those things. Was there ever a time when these experiences challenged your faith? Did you ever feel angry at God? What's been your spiritual path?
So reaching far back. First off, there was so much guilt I had because with both our daughters passing. There's like, well, what if I'd done this? Either way, what if I'd done this? Would Lindsay maybe have not died? Or what if I had made that phone call? Or what if I had, just pinned Lynette down and done an intervention, or all the things that maybe I could have done to change the outcome. But guilt can be such a destructive force. This is not to say that there might not be times we need to review our lives and pick ourselves up and say, okay, you need to fly a bit straighter. You need to stay on that course. But there are some things that you cannot change, and you cannot change another person's choice after they've already made it. You can say, well, I wish you'd consider this. I don't think I know that's not healthy, right, as in Lynette's case. But no, I carried guilt, and I wasn't mad at God, our Heavenly Father, or His Son, Jesus Christ. But I was, again, I was thinking, well, what do I have to learn? Because again, we had been, we were on that, not that we don't all make mistakes, but, we were heading that right direction, and we were making great choices. Right. And how come, even though we were making these great choices, we experienced some of the things that we did, especially the loss of our daughters. And right. That took me a long time to work through that. I was, and I'll say given, but this is many years after Lindsay passed. We were living, I think, in Oregon at the time, and a thought came into my mind. Maybe I was at a receptive point for that day, and it wasn't like I was just sitting and pondering that, but it came in. And the thought was, you did the best you had with the knowledge you had at the time. And that was such a gift. But Julie, that was, 78, that was like 13 or 14 years later. And sometimes you don't realize that you're hanging on to things as much as you are. But that was, I believe, a bit of personal revelation for myself. And I just appreciated that I felt, particularly at that moment, that God loved and understood me and knew that I needed, that maybe I'd always needed that, but maybe I wasn't in a place to receive it in my head until then.
Right.
And then with Lynette, I would say our faith, I mean, I knew I could survive a child passing because I had already. And I don't mean that to sound bitter or anything, but, I go back and I see some of the genealogy sheets of some of my ancestors and see where maybe some of them had 4 children die or, at such loss.
Right.
And this is not to belittle our own, but I'm not the only one that's going through hard things, even though this was one of my hard things. But my faith in my Heavenly Father, and especially in His Son Jesus Christ, when I understood that for myself, when Christ's atonement, as He was working through that in the Garden of Gethsemane and continued till He passed away on the cross and up until His resurrection, that wasn't just for my sins, but that was for every hard thing I have to go through. And so as I've been able to, and this has definitely been a journey, lay that burden at His feet and not pick it back up again. And some days I still pick it back up and it's like, no, I need to leave it there because Jesus Christ's atonement takes care of that if we will allow it.
Mm-hmm.
If we will allow it. And my husband and I also did some service in the addiction recovery program.
Yeah.
And the materials for that are based on our Savior Jesus Christ. And because it is all Christ based, I studied that even more because I was preparing for the meetings that we would facilitate and lead. And I would say that study helped as well as trying to be open to other people are going through hard things. So how can you maybe help them? But no, my faith, I think, was always there. I didn't always have my questions answered right when I wanted them, but I've had them answered.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. You know what I love about that epiphany you had is that it was always true, even if it took so many years for you to be able to personally access it, but it was always true.
Thank you. But once you, and hopefully we do this, once you've had, whether it's an epiphany or just the slow growth of, because I think some spiritual experiences are not the burning bush kind of ones, but they're that growing into it, and where you just, things feel peaceful. And that is also, I think, a part of coming to know all right, I don't understand all things now. Sometime I will, maybe not even until the next life, but sometime I will. So my job is to do the best I have with the knowledge I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then go on beyond knowledge, then that's faith, right?
Exactly.
When you don't have the knowledge, then you have to hold on to your faith.
That's
and
right.
hold on to it and not be persuaded to let it go.
Yes. And whatever gaps or deficiencies really are covered through the grace of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
Like you were saying. That's why it's so powerful. That's why it changes people's lives. Well, I really appreciate that. I'd like to turn just for a moment to one particular way that you found helped you through your grief, and that is through your writing. So could you speak to that a little bit? You are a published author, and your stories have been in a couple of different books. Could you share that?
And I did not bring this resource out, Julie, and I should have, but I actually wrote a little poem that was on Lynette's program when she passed. And I did not bring that up. It's filed away right now. But from a youth, I say in my little, author's blurb in the back of the book that I have some things in, my first sixth grade poem, that I did in class to, the angsty stuff I did when I was a teenager. Like I wrote a poem called Misery Is when I was 15. And one of the lines is not having a boyfriend when your 5-year-old sister does. That,
that's misery. But, but at 15, it is in your life, context, of course.
Yes. And was it valid at the time? Yes. And so, but, that one of those, so I have found, that even though I do enjoy other creative writing, most of what comes out of me when I write is a poem. This writers group that I'm a part of, sometimes for our meetings, we'll have like a prompt, and they'll be maybe think about this scenario and write something about it. Sometimes it's words. And so, and you'll have maybe 5 minutes, 7 minutes to write whatever comes out. And a lot of times what comes out for me is a poem, versus for a lot of the other members in the group, theirs comes out as some kind of a short, like a brief short story that they will maybe add on to later. And so I've enjoyed poetry as well. And I had a friend who her son passed, and one of her family members extended family members was writing a book, and it's called Finding Life After Losing One. And she had asked me to share some of our experiences with losing Lindsay and Lynette. And then in the applicable chapters, she has thoughts from those others who have lost a child. And then some of us would have a chance to share. And like in one chapter, it's called Healthy Healing. And do you want me to read what I said?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 12 of us that had comments on that one. And for Healthy Healing, I had said, keeping busy helped me when our first child, Lindsay, died at only 2 weeks old. I also found a huge amount of comfort serving others. One friend who had her baby during the time that Lindsay was in the hospital would let me borrow her baby sometimes, as I ached to hold a baby. I read everything I could get my hands on, books by people who shared near-death experiences and books and articles regarding death and dying. It was vastly different when Lynette, our adult child, died over 30 years later, As Lindsay was our first child, there were no siblings at her death to think about. With Lynette's death from alcohol poisoning, her 3 surviving siblings, as well as a nephew, our grandson, who knew and loved Lynette, were traumatized as well. That was a huge concern to me as a parent and grandparent. The things that helped me with Lynette were reading additional books on grief, having friends who let me talk, going through Lynette's things and figuring out what happened. And I put figuring out in quotes. We also found support through the hospice organization. I initially thought hospice only for end of life, as in those with long-term illnesses, cancer, and so on. This is not true. All of their bereavement services were offered at no cost. One of the best resources was a monthly newsletter from hospice. So within this book, the authors have different strategies for trying to find your life after losing one. And the subtitle is A Parent's Guide for When a Child Dies. So there's, so that was more, essays, if you would.
Okay.
And then
and again, that one's called Finding Life After Losing One.
And it is by Nikki King and Alice Rampton. Okay. And I think I included it in my resources with you.
Yes. Okay, good. So that'll be on the website.
And then when one of our prompts for our reading group was, and we were talking about Christmas, were some words that were Christmas themes. And what came out for me was a poem that I call Seasons Grieving, which is in the book, as well as I have 2 other poems in here that are lighter. One's very light but fun, and one that's a little bit more introspective, as well about a prose piece that's about my grandmother, and then the other 8 authors that we worked together for this anthology. We have all genres, and so I really appreciate this because there are, there's like a young adult romance. There's recollections of. For one of our members of the group whose dad was a firefighter, a volunteer firefighter, about a Christmas, but they're all winter/Christmas related. And that is out and available on Amazon.
And that is Winter Wonder.
Right. And you want to probably put writings from our neck of the woods, because we found out later there's a lot of things that say Winter Wonder.
Winter Wonder, writings from our neck of the woods. And it's on Amazon, right?
Yes.
I love that. Well, and I'm going to, for our compilation podcast next week, I'm going to have you actually read your writings from that book.
Oh, sure.
So that will be really exciting. And
I'd be happy to.
I like that the book is an anthology of this whole sphere of life experiences, because grief really is, for a time, grief feels like an eclipse, like a solar eclipse. It's all you can see. Everything is dark.
But that's this one. But this anthology, though, is not about. Well, there's some grief in there, but it's Christmas and life and loving.
Well, and eventually you find you're able to come to a place where your grief experiences are part of your some life experiences.
Yes.
Right. And that's the goal, is to grieve well so that you can get past the eclipse into where you can appreciate it, but you don't have to live in the darkness every day.
Thank you. And one thing that we have done thoughtfully and yearly since Lynette passed, as much as we will never ever forget either the day that Lindsay died or the day that Lynette died, we choose to celebrate that they lived. And so for Lynette, every year since that first year, on her birthday, or which is November 17th, and that first year it was over a weekend, so we had a LAFF Fest weekend. And LAFF, it spells the L is for laughter, the A is for arts, the F is for film, and the other F is for food. We call it LAFF Fest. And so that first 2.5 months after she passed, or almost 2 months to the date that she passed, we invited her friends and family to wear yellow and to do things to laugh and to find some way to do art and film and food. And so we continue to do that. There's still participants from Lynette's friend group, but a lot of it now is our extended family and friends who will maybe wear yellow. I had one friend, she says, I look awful in yellow, so I'm going to wear purple. And it's like, that's totally fine. You wear purple. And then sometimes they'll share on Facebook or on Instagram, or just if they see me, it's like, I did this today. And so, because that's so much a part of who she is,
And you do that every November 17th, around that time.
And so like this year, over that weekend, our grandson Ty's going to be in a play at the local high school. And so that will be our art, I think, for it. Is we'll do that. And yep, Lynette loves sushi and all foods, and was a bit of an inventive chef, and she laughter,
What a beautiful way to honor her life. I love this idea. Laughter, art, film, and food.
Yep.
Oh, I hope this catches on. And
well, and so I don't post a ton on social media, but you'll see me post something with LAFF Fest definitely every year, and then I post on Lynette's memorial page too, and that's one of the part of the coming to that eclipse is finding ways to I'll say honor and recognize these individuals, because even though they're not physically with us, their influence can remain. And yes, some of it was hard and heartbreaking and awful, and if I could change it, I would, but she lived.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shanna. It's been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I love what has come out. I love the things we've talked about. Before we sign off, would you answer my final question? What do you think it means to grieve well?
And even though I knew the question, as I think about it, what I think it means to grieve well is to acknowledge that you may grieve differently than some of the people that are closest to you. And what, air quotes again, works for some individuals may not work well for you. I think that to grieve well means to allow yourself, if you're having a no good, very bad day, to acknowledge that you're having that no good, very bad day. And then for myself, I probably will allow myself to feel that. Mm-hmm. But I also will say, okay, you know what you can do to help yourself. You know what you can do. There's ways to do that. There's ways to do that. And realizing that there are so many people out there that are hurting. I think grieving well also is reaching out. And some people aren't huggers. Before I hug somebody, I say, do you want a hug? Because sometimes people do want that. They want that. Other people don't. It's like, acknowledge what other people need may not be what you need. But again, acknowledge that you're not going to be better right away. I think sometimes we think, oh, I should be better now. No, maybe a while. Yeah. Maybe a while before. I did used to do a blog. I don't really do it that much anymore. And I wrote something, and then about a year later, I reviewed it, and I thought, ooh, I was still in a pretty dark place, but I didn't think I was. I didn't think I was. So realize that it is a journey. It is a journey, and it's that what I think was one of the biggest takeaways I've had from both experiences, that it's not going to be like waving a magic wand and you're going to feel better. It's a journey.
Thank you so much, Shanna. Really appreciate it. It's been really lovely.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for doing this. This is important work.
I think so too.